On August 23rd, 2024, Sony released a video game that reportedly cost $400 million. 14 days later, they took it offline, refunded every single copy, and moved on like it never happened. At its absolute peak, this game had 697 players, not 697,000, 697. You could fit everyone playing Concord at its busiest moment into one high school gym, and still have seats left over. 2 months later, the studio that built the game, gone, shut down, erased completely from the internet. Now, you probably already seen 100 videos about why Concord was a bad game. The designs, the vibes, the culture war stuff. That's not what this is. Because here's what's almost nobody actually explaining. Concord didn't fail because it was bad. Plenty of mediocre games make money. Concord failed because on a spreadsheet it was doomed before a single human being ever pressed play. So today we're doing an autopsy. Not on the game, on the business. Where the money went, what it would have actually taken to break even, and the exact moment this became mathematically impossible to save. Let's open it up. To understand how big this loss was, you first have to understand how badly Sony wanted it to work. Concord wasn't a side project. Internally, according to a Firewalk developer who spoke to podcast host Colin Moriarty, it was being called the future of PlayStation. They compared it to Star Wars, there were plans for shows and movies, it even got its own episode in Amazon's secret level anthology, which, and I love this, still aired in December, months after the game was already dead. And it fit a much bigger bet. In 2022, Sony bought Bungie, the Destiny studio, for $3.5 billion, specifically to learn how to build live service games. Games as a service. The Fortnite model, play forever, pay forever. Sony said out loud they wanted 12 of those shipped by 2026. Concord was the flagship, the proof that PlayStation could do it too. So, this wasn't a small studio gambling its own cash, this was the entire PlayStation live service strategy riding on one hero shooter. Hold on to that, it's why the fall hit so hard. Okay, so where did it actually break? And I don't mean at launch, I mean the cracks that were already there while they were still building it. Depending on who you ask, Concord was in development for around 8 years. One designer said 8, the studio later said full production only started in 2022. Either way, this game was conceived in a world that no longer existed by the time it shipped. Think about when the idea was born. Overwatch was king, the hero shooter was the hot new genre, but by 2024, that genre was completely saturated. Overwatch, Apex, Valorant, Marvel Rivals, all fighting over the same players. And here's the killer, nearly all of them were free. Which brings us to the price. Concord launched at $40, in a genre where the competition costs nothing. Really sit with what that asks a player to do. You're a brand new studio, you're asking a stranger to pay $40 upfront, sight unseen, to try your version of a game they can already play for free, with the friends who already own it tonight. That's not a problem a better trailer fixes, that's a fundamental positioning error. You priced yourself out of your own market before you said a single word. But the warning was right there. In July 2024, a month before launch, Sony ran a public beta, and the numbers were quietly, alarmingly bad. That was a market telling them, in advance, exactly what was coming. And this next part, as someone who's watched a lot of projects die, genuinely gets me. According to the same reporting, inside Firewalk, there was a culture of, and I love this phrase, toxic positivity, meaning you weren't allowed to say anything negative about the game, not the designs, not the direction, nothing. There was an internal belief that it simply could not fail. So you had a market screaming no, and the company culture engineered to make that no impossible to hear. That's not a bad luck, that's a machine built to ignore reality. August 23rd, 2024. Concord launches on PS5 and PC. And it just doesn't land. On Steam, where we can actually see real numbers, it peaks at 697 concurrent players on day 1. For context, that made it roughly the 150th most played game on PlayStation during its own launch week. Within days, it's in the double digits. Industry analysts at Game Discover Co. estimated total sales at around 25,000 copies. Both platforms combined, with PS5 making about 60% of those copies being sold. 25,000 copies at $40. I'll let you do the math, but Forbes ran the headlines for us. Concord made roughly $1 million. And then, this is the wild part. They gave it all back. September 3rd, 11 days after launch, Firewalk announced the servers were going dark. September 6th, it's gone. Delisted from Steam, the Epic Store, and the PlayStation Store. Every buyer, including people who bought physical discs, got a full refund. So that $1 million in sales, effectively zero, handed back. Concord became the second shortest lived online game in history. The only one that died faster lasted 8 days. And on October 29th, Sony closed Firewalk Studios for good. 8 years of work, hundreds of people, one of the most hype internal projects at PlayStation, deleted in about 2 months. Alright, here's the part I actually care about. What did this cost really? And I have to be straight with you because that's the whole point of this channel. The exact budget is not confirmed. Sony's never released it, so let me give you the honest range. The low end from rumors is about $100 million. A mid-range report put it just over $200 million. And that's excluding what Sony paid to buy Firewalk in the first place. And the number everyone remembers, $400 million, came from Colin Moriarty, citing an anonymous developer. $200 million spent by the original owner before Sony got involved, then another $200 million from Sony to drag it to the finish line after it showed up in, let's quote it, laughable shape. That $400 million figure got a pushback. Several PlayStation devs publicly disputed it, so take it with a grain of salt. But here's what's wild. It almost doesn't matter which number is true. Watch. Let's be as generous as humanly possible and use the lowest estimate, $100 million, against essentially zero retained revenue. That's $100 million loss on the kind end. Now let's talk break even, the thing that should have been on the whiteboard somewhere years earlier. At $40 a copy after the store and platform take their cut, say Sony nets somewhere around $25 to $28 per sale. Just to claw back $100 million, Concord needs to sell in the ballpark of 3.5 to 4 million copies. To cover the 400 million version, 14 up to 15 million copies sold of a $40 hero shooter against free games in a saturated genre. In reality, what happened is that it sold 25,000 copies. That's not missing your target, that's missing it about 99.4%. This wasn't a game that underperformed, it's a game whose business model required a miracle the market had already loudly refused to grant, and the opportunity cost is its own horror story. One report noted that $400 million is roughly the budget of 4 Witcher-free games, one of the best-selling, most acclaimed games ever made. With money to spare, Sony spent 4 Witcher-frees to produce 14 days of a game nobody played. By most accounts, this is the single biggest loss Sony has ever taken on a game they actually released. So, what did it actually change? Because this is where a $400 million mistake gets interesting. Almost immediately, Sony started quietly killing its own live service games. Reports came out that the live service God of War project was cancelled. Other unannounced titles, gone. That grand plan for 12 live service games by 2026, Sony walked it right back and publicly recommitted to what made them their money in the first place. Big, single-player, story-driven games, roughly once a year. Think about that. Concord didn't just lose money, it reversed the strategic direction of the biggest player in console gaming. Here's the takeaway I actually want you to walk away with, because it's not really about video games. Concord is what happens when sunk cost beats reality. Every year they spent every dollar they poured in, and made it harder to admit the truth. They were building for a market that had already moved on. The toxic positivity wasn't a quirk, it was the immune system of a project that couldn't afford to hear the word no. The most expensive words in business aren't "I don't know", they are "we have already come too far to stop". Concord had 8 years, $400 million, and the full weight of PlayStation behind it. And it got unbeaten by one simple question nobody in that building was allowed to ask out loud. Why would anybody pay $40 for this, when the game right next to it is free?